Hello and welcome to this week's bonus episode of Planet Critical, the podcast for a world in crisis. My name is Rachel Donald. I'm a climate corruption journalist and your host. Last week I spoke with Susan Krumdijk, a mechanical engineer, full professor and chair of the energy transition at Heriot-Watt University. This was such a fantastic conversation. I so enjoyed speaking with Susan. She gave a vision for a world, a vision for a future transitioned world, and explained how engineering can be used to get us to that world, a world of renewables, a world of less, a world of happier, healthier people. And just completely flipped the process normally of getting to that vision on its head by starting with the science, thinking about how the science can fulfill the need rather than respond purely to the crisis. And also what is so important is she uses science, but also hammered home time and time again that narrative is equally important, that we're not going to get there unless we change our understanding of the paradigm. The thing that I want to touch on in this bonus video is about that narrative. I mentioned degrowth pretty early on in the episode, and essentially what she said is like, well, you don't need to start from a place of degrowth. Like degrowth will just kind of automatically happen. That politics and economy are very short-term things, whereas engineering, science, energy, all these things, like you can plan long term for these. Now, obviously, they are constrained by the capitalist paradigm and by power and all these sorts of things. But essentially, what she was saying is rather than start from a place of like, oh, we need to contract our energy, therefore, she was saying we can transition to a renewable world and that will contract our energy and our economy and our needs, essentially, sort of as a byproduct. And this very much ties into degrowth scholarship. You know, the degrowth scholarship sells a vision of a better, happier, healthier world, which is absolutely crucial. But the contracting is kind of evident from the off. It's like, we will have to contract, and here's how it will be better. And Susan says, the world will be better. By the way, it will also have contracted. It's a very nuanced vision that she explains. There is no sense of returning to some kind of dark age. It's about using our materials and our energy efficiently. And I know Jevons paradox, efficiency is a problem in and of itself, but say using them well. So we discussed the fact that the world is kind of a madhouse and nothing is run particularly well. We don't use things to maximize their efficiency and to maximize their capacity because we have the magic of fossil fuels to kind of just fill in any and all gaps. And we cannot continue to run on fossil fuels. So she explains how we can build homes that use 5% of the energy just because they're designed better to insulate naturally with, you know, she talks about log cabins and how efficient they are. She talks about the fact that people could be given a phone and a computer kind of when they reach maturity or become teenagers, and those things could last them for a lifetime. Like we have these engineering capacities, and we're still going to live in a digital world, for example, but that world will be localized. It will be communal. There will be more art. There will be more leisure time. It is a lot of the degrowth narrative, but just coming from it through a different lens. And I wonder if in a post-Enlightenment tradition, i.e. when rationality and intellectualism are still upheld as the driving forces of human development, I wonder if this is yet another way to sell that necessary contraction of our energy use and our economy through engineering, saying that, well, here are all the ways that science can react to the problem and fix it and provide a better life. And then that Trojan horse is degrowth. I used to talk about how degrowth could Trojan horse in climate policies. Coming at it from an engineering perspective could Trojan horse degrowth into the public sphere. People are very nervous about the idea of an economy being contracted. That's very normal when we've had, you know, however many decades, centuries of economic theory being tied to labor. People are very concerned that there won't be jobs, that they won't be able to feed themselves, their homes, their family, etc. One of the things that I've spoken about a couple of times is my concern that like degrowth is the wrong word because it is so frightening. The idea of just suddenly not being in a growth dominated economy, unless you really have spent time kind of researching what that means and what that would look like for people, it is just the exact opposite of the world that we live in. And even though the world that we live in is obviously not working for the majority of people, it's still the world that we live in. There's still a familiarity to it. So presenting the exact opposite in a word is quite a frightening thing. Smuggling that necessary contraction in through an engineering paradigm. Here's how we just engineer better and how we use science better. And here's how we provide for people using all of the know-how, the millennia of built up know-how to do that. I just think is a really fascinating concept. And what's so key in this transitioned world that Susan presents is that she says we have to ditch the idea that we're going to substitute renewables in the sense of we're going to have the exact same world running with renewable energy. We're going to have a different world be formed through the capacities of our renewable energy. So it's not about a different energy source. It's about a different way of organizing. It's about a different way of living. It's about responding to what is actually feasible in terms of the planetary boundaries, in terms of what we have access to, and in terms of what we want. And I think now is such a prime time for this because people are increasingly aware that the world we exist in today just isn't working for the vast majority. Now, that's not to say social progress hasn't been made. Huge amounts of social progress have been made. Modern medicine, all of these things, they're absolutely crucial. Would not want to live without them. But our energy demands are running away with themselves. Our economy is running away with itself. The invisible hand of the market, allegedly, is, it's making errors because obviously it's not an invisible hand. It's a bunch of oligarchs who are making bad decisions. We're looking at a summer of strikes in the UK across so many sectors because people are fed up and they want better. This is the time to feed a vision into public discourse. Yes, we will have renewables and the world will look different because of it. You won't have a car, but you will have a community. We will also still have fossil fuels because you cannot run a renewable economy without fossil fuel energy. Susan is so adamant that the solution to the climate part of the polycrisis lies with engineers, that they have been researching humanity's way out of the problems it creates for itself for millennia. And that part of her work involves asking engineers to change how they think about the problem. So where do we want to be in 100 years' time? How do we get there? How do you think long-term rather than responding immediately to a current part of the crisis when, from a systems perspective, it is likely to cause another problem either immediately or later down the line? She talks about retrofitting, the whole thing with insulation, which is being touted as what certainly the UK government should do, retrofit all the homes. And she's like, it's just not that simple. If you throw a bunch of insulation in an attic, which is essentially what the government is suggesting, then you're going to have problems with moisture down the line. So she wants engineers to have a really clear long-term vision. And it seems completely feasible and possible. So if we've got that part of the equation down, how do we get the politicians and the economists to have long-term vision? I suppose we're not going to figure that out today. Also, how are we going to fund these projects? All of these questions do need to be answered. Given the focus on locality and community that Susan presents, I wonder if part of the solution, part of being able to kickstart this transition and transition engineering will actually come from grassroots level, from communities being willing to band together and do what needs to be done or attempt what needs to be done if given the accurate information in the face of incompetent federal state level governance. You definitely also need the middle section of society, which I'm increasingly thinking actually means the legal entities of corporations to do something. I'm not going to figure that out today. I'm not sure how you scale a vision of locality to take off at the speed at which we need this transition to happen. But what is so exciting is we can kind of see where we need to go increasingly. Degrowth is a part of that. We have this engineering perspective now. We know where we are. We know where we need to be. The middle steps, I think that's the next part of the equation. How do you combat power? How do you combat economic forces? How do you combat a paradigm Susan says with narrative, I think that's a huge, huge, huge part of it. How do you get business on board in a business-dominated world? This seems to be the next part to sort of figure out. And I'm not going to figure it out today, so I will wrap it up there. If you're new here and enjoying the channel, please remember to subscribe below. If you want to support Planet Critical, you can do so on Patreon or at planetcritical.com. Both the links are in the description box below. And a huge thank you to the Planet Critical community who keeps this project going. Thank you everyone for watching. I hope this was valuable, and I will see you next week.